I'd like to welcome everyone to the Alt Car Expo Conference. I'm Richard Battersby. I'm the equipment manager for the City of Oakland, and I'm also the director for the East Bay Clean Cities Coalition. I'm happy to see you all here today. I see a lot of familiar faces, which is great, but I also see a lot of new faces, which I think is even better. So we're pleased to have Mayor Libby Schaaf here this morning to say a few words of introduction. Libby Schaaf was inaugurated as Oakland, California's 50th mayor on January 5th, 2015. As the mayor of the City of Oakland, Libby Schaaf is committed to alternatives, choices, and options for the city operations as well as for the public. She is deeply committed to reducing greenhouse gases and energy consumption. And she's also been known to ride in alternative fuel vehicles, the fire-breathing snail dragon type. Anybody else running a fire-breathing snail dragon? I didn't think so. So, like she did her inauguration, Mayor Schaaf is willing to try all good new things. So here she is today to welcome you to the City of Oakland Alt Car Expo. Mayor Schaaf.
Oh, that was a great introduction. Thank you. It is my pleasure to serve as the mayor of my hometown, Oakland, California. Welcome. We think that it is absolutely perfect that AltCar chose Oakland to host this great two-day event. We are a city that it absolutely believes in environmental stewardship as well as creativity. And it is true that I think so far I've been identified as the only mayor in America whose official car is a Burning Man art car that is in the shape of a giant snail that breathes fire. Now, I've been challenged to see if someone can design, though, a new fuel system so that I can have a zero-emissions fire-breathing snail car. Oakland is so proud to be recognized in the forefront of climate change, of environmental stewardship. I was very proud to represent this city as part of the Local Action Leadership Circle at COP21 in Paris in December of this last year. So you come to a city that gets it. I'm so proud to kind of inherit the amazing work of such dedicated and passionate city staff, collaborative partners in this region, as well as previous leaders of this city who have cared about this issue long before it became sexy. So we're very excited that the public is going to be coming down to Oakland to test out, ride, and drive these cool alternative vehicles from 10 to 5 both days of this event. And I just hope that you let your imagination run wild and that being an environmentalist can be fun. It can be creative. So I can't wait to participate myself. Have a great day, and thank you so much for your leadership in this critical area.
Well, thank you again, Mayor Schaaf. We have a packed schedule this morning. Our first session is called The Single Most Important Thing to Know About Sustainable Transportation, or words to that effect. The thought behind this panel is folks show up to these events, and typically you're attending sessions where someone who put together the agenda dictated what the topic's going to be. I thought, let's try something a little bit different, and if it works really well, then yeah, it was our idea, but if it doesn't work so well, I think somebody else maybe messed that up. You might be asking yourself, why are we doing things this way? And I have to tell you, I've been with the City of Oakland about 2 years now, and here it's the type of environment where we don't get asked why we did something. We get asked why we aren't doing something. So we're not afraid to experiment, we're not afraid to be involved and to try new things, and doggone it, we do it just because we can. So let me introduce our panelists here with us today. Coming up first, we've got Randy Rentschler, who's the Director of Legislation and Public Affairs for San Francisco Bay Area's Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Bay Area Toll Authority. Do you get any complaints from toll violations? I can imagine. MTC is recognized across the nation as a premier transportation planning and financing agency. It is Mr. Rentschler's job to advance the legislative, public outreach, and external communications objectives of the 21-member commission at the local, state, and federal levels. Before joining MTC, Randy worked as an investment banker structuring local government debt. From time to time, he also guest lectures on the subject of public finance or transportation at San Jose State, UC Berkeley, Stanford, and the University of San Francisco. Next on the panel, we've got Mr. Damian Breen from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. He heads up the innovation section, where he directs a staff of 38 in the oversight, management, and administration of an annual budget of $85 million. The section executes innovative incentive programs and develops and supports the Air District's data, finance, and permitting information technology programs in order to reduce criteria pollutant and greenhouse gas emissions. Mr. Breen previously served as the Director of Strategic Incentives Division, where he oversaw the grants programs targeted by Air District to reduce greenhouse gases, particulate matter, and health risk, and also worked for 10 years in the Air District's Compliance and Enforcement Division. He possesses a wealth of knowledge on California regulations pertaining to both mobile and stationary sources. Mr. Breen holds 2 Bachelor of Science degrees, one in geology from the National University of Ireland, and one in pollution assessment and control from the Irish Institute for Technology. Next up, we have Mr. Tim Littman. Tim's from University of California, Davis. He's got a PhD, and he's an, did I say Davis?
I went to
Davis. You know, sometimes that slips out, although he's currently working at UC Berkeley. Where did he get all his knowledge and training? UC Davis. And those of you that don't know, I used to work for UC Davis, so Tim, I semi-apologize for doing that to you. Anyway, Tim's UC Berkeley energy and environmental technology, economics, and policy researcher with the University of California, Berkeley. He's serving as co-director for the campus's Transportation Sustainability Research Center based at the Institute of Transportation Studies, and also is a lecturer in the UC Berkeley Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. Dr. Littman's research focuses on electric vehicles, fuel cell technology, combined heat and power systems, renewable energy, and electricity and hydrogen infrastructure. Have you guys branched out into the dilithium crystal arena? Okay, good. He completed a PhD degree in environmental policy analysis with the graduate group in ecology at UC Davis, and also holds an MS degree from UC Davis in transportation technology and policy 1998, and a BA degree from Stanford University 1990. He's the incoming chair of the Alternative Transportation Fuels and Technologies Committee of the National Academy of Science Transportation Research Board, a member of the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technical Advisory Committee for the U.S. Department of Energy, and on the editorial board of the International Journal of Sustainable Engineering. And I would tell you what he does in his free time, but I don't think Tim has any. Up next, we've got Mr. John Cato. John has over 20 years of experience that includes developing and implementing California environmental air regulatory policies and programs, serving in the military, and working in a small family-owned business. His current focus is the implementation of energy policies in the fuel and transportation sectors at the California Energy Commission. Prior to this Energy Commission, Mr. Cato's experience at the Air Resources Board encompassed a diverse range of topics, including ambient air monitoring, emissions testing, and state and federal regulation, policy and program development and implementation. He has overseen programs that include small business financing, emissions testing of hybrid trucks, and technology demonstration project. And on the far end, we've got Mr. Brent Jameson joining us from California Department of General Services, where he's the Deputy Director of the Interagency Support Division. He was appointed in April 2014 by Governor Edmund G. Brown Jr. Prior to his appointment, Jameson served as Chief of the California Department of General Services Office of Fleet and Asset Management since 2011. He was Deputy Secretary of Policy and Planning at the California State and Consumer Services Agency from 2009 to 2010, and Assistant Deputy Director of Legislation at the California Department of Consumer Affairs in 2009. Jameson served in multiple positions at the Governor's Office of Planning and Research from 2004 to 2009, including Deputy Director of Legislation, Assistant Deputy Director, and Senior Legislative Analyst. Jameson earned a BS in Political Science from Santa Clara University and a Juris Doctorate degree from the University of Pacific McGeorge School of Law. So now that I'm completely out of breath and need a drink of water, I'm going to turn the presentation over to our panelists. We're going to start with Mr. Randy Rentschler from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, And Randy will be departing at 9:30, so I normally would ask that you hold any questions till the end of the panel to start an interaction. But if you have a question specifically for Randy, because he has to leave, please ask it at the end of his presentation. So, Randy?
Thank you all, and good morning, and forgive me for having to leave, but those pesky legislators across the street insist on having a hearing about the agency that I work for, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. I suspect a lot of you don't know what MTC is. Some of you might. If you took a public opinion poll, about a third of the people would have heard of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. But what it essentially is a planning and finance organization. For you, if you have Fast Track, the commission implements Fast Track. If you have a Clipper card, the commission does that too. So I suspect this audience is not part of that general audience of only the 1/3 knowing, but in any event, I think it's always best to tell you where I work. You know, the electric car has a little bit of a personal touch for me. You know, it's always been seen in automotive circles as the car of the future and always will be. So I grew up in Lansing, Michigan, across the street from the plant that General Motors made the first EV1. My brother works for Ford Motor Company. My father worked in that complex of plants that's now been torn down, gone, which maybe give you a sense of why we have the politics we have today. But you know, looking at this brochure, the electric car certainly has come a long, long way. I don't think you can declare victory yet, but you can certainly declare an enormous amount of progress. I think when Thomas Edison and Henry Ford first preferred to build the electric car as opposed to a gasoline vehicle in 1913, they did it for all the reasons that we want to build an electric car today. It was clearly the best alternative. But for reasons that we're still struggling with battery life and distance, the gasoline engine prevailed and has now for over 100 years. A lot of people use the word sustainability, and it has different meanings. And I kind of want to give you a sense of where the commission comes on the sustainability issue. While the commission does sponsor with the Air District a whole host of activities, including electric car, free trials for people, we call it the electric car experience. We hosted it in a number of places over the last year. We work with the Air District on a handful of programs that we think are important to try to deal with the enormous challenge we have on mobility and climate change. Sustainability for us is probably what you experienced this morning, which is hitting a pothole on the road, congestion on the roadways, BART system being 40 years old, Muni maybe not being on time. What we're focused on at the commission primarily is to try to sustain what we have right now that our parents and grandparents built for us, and mostly my generation. I'm kind of ashamed. I'm on the end of it, so I usually don't claim it. But they didn't call the baby boomers the me generation for no reason. We've ignored this problem. We've granted it to the millennials to solve. It's going to be very expensive. But we see sustainability as sustaining the system we have, and it's incredibly expensive. To give you a sense, in California, we need billions of dollars just to maintain the local streets and roads that we have. By fixing those local streets and roads, it's more safe for bicyclists, pedestrians. It reduces the wear and tear on all of your vehicles. But instead of raising the gas tax, which is what we need to do, the legislature has a mechanism where the gas tax has decreased by 9.5 cents over the past 18 months, and it's going to decrease another 2.5 cents here in the next month or so. Now, that's in the face of public opinion polls that says that if we were to raise the gas tax by a dime, somehow the economy would crater. But that's the dysfunction that we deal with on the policy side where I work. You know, past that, I think we live in one of the most unique places with respect to the issue that you care about, electric vehicles. California has not just a systematic program to incentivize them, one of which I'm working to get rid of, which I'll talk about in a second. But we actually have a builder here that has a back order of something like 300,000 electric cars. So again, I think we can't declare victory yet on the subject, but we can certainly declare some success. If you read the newspapers, and most people don't, you'll notice there's been a series of stories in the news, particularly about how congested the carpool lanes are. And anyone a fan of Larry David? Anyone? Yeah, not the old guys. I totally hear you. You know, getting the electric car in the carpool lane was actually, the origin was a Larry David Curb Your Enthusiasm show. Because as the narcissist that he was, by doing a social good and driving to a Dodger game in a Prius, he thought he should have access to the carpool lane. And that turned into a bill. This is true. That bill was sponsored by Fran Pavley, and that bill passed. So now, by owning, you know, my son sent me an Instagram picture of this enormous, you know, not a supercar, but, you know, kind of a hyper, one of these cars that goes, you know, 300 miles per hour. It's got gull-wing doors. It's got a clean air sticker on it. So glad that guy's in the carpool lane. So happy that he's there. We have a serious problem with these vehicles in the carpool lanes. And the commission I work for is opposed to it. And we try to urge you guys to come to terms with it. When the EV1 was built at the factory across the street where I played high school football, there probably was a reason to have an incentive for these things. And accessing the carpool lanes and mobility is a pretty significant incentive. But we need these carpool lanes to work for carpools and buses. We need to move people, not cars. And just because someone owns an electric vehicle, a plug-in, that they don't plug in, my neighbor doesn't, drives a long distance to work, he'd be way better off on sustainability grounds if he lived closer to his office and didn't drive the average distance. So if I owned a big SUV and I lived in Oakland and came to this conference, I'd be doing way more for the economy, for the environment, than if I owned an electric plug-in vehicle that I didn't plug in and lived in Pleasanton. And that's the real challenge the Commission's trying to face. Sustaining the system we have, and also sustaining a future where we're not committed to moving people 30 miles a day every day to work. So that's what sustainability is to the Commission. That's why they're working so hard on it. That's where you get the really big savings with respect to greenhouse gas emissions. So when you hear me in the newspaper harping about electrics in the carpool lane, it's not because I don't like electric cars. I love them. They were built right across the street in the very beginning. So look, that's my quick presentation. I want to apologize for having to go across the street. Those pesky legislators are meeting. If you have any questions about the Commission, I'll take advantage of the fact that I have to leave at the expense of my colleagues before I exit. So thank you so much.
Do we have a question for Mr. Rentschler? Okay, you can't get by with no questions, Randy. This is probably an easy one, but it seems like there's acknowledgement at the federal, state, and local levels that addressing the infrastructure needs of our nation is a serious issue, and we're probably going to see proposals for financial means of addressing that, which translates to taxes at multiple levels. So there could be an opportunity, if these measures are successful, that there's funding available for the infrastructure. Is there a way to tie that to sustainable transportation and maybe take advantage of this opportunity that probably won't occur for a long, long time if it happens?
So, you know, what we have on the sustainable side is a pretty big program called Cap and Trade. And the legislature created that. It's mostly going toward transit, high-speed rail, but a big chunk is out there for all vehicles of all sorts, including heavy construction vehicles. So I think in our world, we're kind of doing better than most people. Most people are starving to death. You know, most people, local streets and roads, Caltrans, they have no money, and they haven't had it for years. In fact, as I mentioned, it's going down. I think the struggle is to try to motivate a reluctant legislature that needs a 2/3 vote to do a thing just to keep what we got. And that's a really hard thing for them to do. They're not very good at it. And in fact, they hate doing it. The politics are crappy for the Republicans, more so than the Dems. But marginal Dems in marginal districts in an election year aren't leaping to go raise the gas tax. They're just not. And so, and that's in Sacramento. I mean, in Washington, D.C., it's, you know, I mean, I just don't know what to say. It's turned into a comedy show. It's kind of sad. So it went from dysfunction to, you know, almost a farce. So I'm not so sure we can be optimistic that we're going to get anything big out out of Washington DC. I think the most hopeful thing for you all who work in this business is that the California State Legislature can come to terms and find the 2 or 3 votes it needs to pass a sustainable transportation package so that the roads that you all are on every day on your bikes and your vehicles can be maintained.
Great. Thanks again. Oh, we have one more, 2 more, Bill.
Beyond the funding part of it, I'm wondering what MTC's sort of vision of the future is in terms of working with the disjointed Bay Area's transit agencies, and
Yeah.
sort of working to create more of a seamless experience for Bay Area travelers by transit.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how to answer that.
Oh, look at the time.
You know, for all of you who have been watching the minutia of the MTC ABAG discussion, you know, like the world's going to end that we merge 2 staffs together but keep the boards the same. I mean, that's where the bar is. Okay, so thinking that, you know, no one would invent the oddity of 26 transit districts that we have in the Bay Area. If you clean sheeted it, like no one would default to that, right? But look, we have an odd culture in the Bay Area of local control. We have 101 cities. You know, the joke I make, I'm going to get in trouble for this if the press is here, but, you know, in many places, if you had a big institution like a fire department, you would give capability. You would have a truck, you'd have a boat and a helicopter and real capability, you know. You'd have a radio system that's interconnected. But we have 100 and some odd fire departments, and none of that exists. I mean, the only helicopters that exist in the Bay Area are the East Bay Regional Parks District helicopters. So what we have is almost like a system geared for the achievement of becoming a fire captain. Like that's the good thing we have. See what I'm getting at? That's the great asset we've given the public is a matriculation program for captains. So we have this scattered thing, and it's not just transit, it's everything. Schools, it's everything. So how we take that on has been a challenge for the last 20 years I've been working there. We've done it on the margins, but we have not succeeded, as you pointed out.
John, you have a quick question?
I do. Now that we have a surface transportation funding authorization for the next 5 years, I'm wondering if MTC is considering competing for any of the USDOT funds with respect to alternative fuel infrastructure project funding and deployment within the 9-county Bay Area region.
So look, that's a really good question. The commission generally doesn't seek money. We seek to help others get money. From time to time, we'll do it for ourselves. We have in the past. So I think what we probably try to do is to find the best thing out there and then get behind a single thing. These sweepstakes in DC are it's like winning the lottery, except the money's not very big and the odds are really low. So it's a bit, you know, we generally don't focus on it. It takes a lot of time. There's not very much money, and they tend to give the money to contested senatorial states, which we're not one of those, and so it's really hard for California to compete in those programs.
So when there's an $800 million annual solicitation like the Fast Lane program, which just closed, MTC is not planning to submit strategic submittals to that for funding of specific projects?
We are going to do something in the fast lane part. We are, but again, we're going to help somebody else. We'll probably work with the state or work with someone to try to find the single thing that we think is the best and put all of our effort in DC behind a thing that we like, as opposed to us chasing it ourselves. We generally don't chase things ourselves, generally.
It's got to be really quick.
Do you have a quick opinion on gas tax versus a miles traveled tax?
Yeah. Well, I have a strong opinion about that. So, even if you look 30, 40 years in the future, 95% of the vehicles will almost certainly run on an internal combustion engine of some sort. Turning a tax that is paid by maybe 25 racks in the state of California to making it be paid by 30 million people in California is deeply ineffective. There's nothing wrong with the gas tax that raising it won't solve. Okay? The gas tax is a climate tax, it's a carbon tax, it has all the social good you want, it incentivizes people to get small cars, to tax big cars. The only thing wrong with the gas tax is that people won't raise it. I believe, as a cynic sometimes, that people who don't want to do the right thing throw up a little, shiny object for people to go chase, right? They don't want to raise the gas tax. they've tried everything but doing it. This is the shiny object that people, oh yeah, let's do that. So it's a mistake, and it's an error for us to chase a thing that can't happen, except for maybe way off in the future where it might be meaningful, way off in the future. So we just need to raise the gas tax, put a vehicle reg fee on all vehicles, so that we can pretend that they're paying their fair share, and we're done with it.
Great. Thank you so much, Randy.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Now we're going to move into the rest of the panel format. I would ask that you hold your questions till the end of the discussion. First up, we've got Mr. Damian Breen from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here today. I prepared a little presentation just because I love PowerPoints, because I'm a geek. But the question before us this morning is, what's the single most important thing to know about sustainable transportation? But for those of you who are not familiar with this, I thought I'd introduce the Bay Area Air Quality Management District to you this morning. Well, I'm going to try. Well, I don't need the slide for that. So we are your local regulatory agency that permits stationary sources of air pollution. We have about 20,000 of those here in our approximately 5,000 square mile area, stretching from Santa Rosa in the north to Gilroy in the south, and from San Francisco in the west to Fairfield in the east. We, in that area, have about 7 million residents or so, and our mission is to improve public health, air quality, and the global climate, and to make every single one of those people agree with our policies on air pollution. So how are we doing? Relative to our primary mission, which is to give the people of the Bay Area healthy air to breathe, we're concentrated on a couple of key pollutants. One of them is ozone, which is a respiratory irritant, and it shortens life and cardiovascular health. And you can see that over time, we've done a really good job of reducing those emissions here in the Bay Area. The same goes for particulate matter. PM is, and especially PM 2.5, is basically soot that penetrates deep into the lungs and causes severe health effects. And again, as you can see here over time, those trends in the Bay Area are heading down, principally because of policies that have been taken by the Air District in terms of regulation, choices that members of the public have made towards relative to their own transportation and health, and policies by the state. While those trends are down, we continue to have significant problems in local areas with what we call basically hotspots for air pollution. That means that folks are exposed locally to high levels of PM10 due to the emissions in vehicles that surround them. We also have this thing called greenhouse gas. It's a new fad. People are catching on to it. But in the Bay Area, that is beginning to level out and actually trend in a downward trajectory. But there are significant amounts of reductions that are necessary in order for us to meet state, federal, and local goals. Our local goal here for greenhouse gas emissions reductions, the one that's been adopted by the agency I work for, is an 80% reduction of greenhouse gas levels below 1990 levels by the year 2050. We're nowhere near that. We're just scratching the surface of that. So when somebody asks me the single most important thing to know about sustainable transportation is, for me, the single most important thing about sustainable transportation is that it is the key to clean and healthy air quality. So how do we know that? What's our opportunity with sustainable transportation? Some of you coming here this morning might have experienced our famous Bay Area traffic, our legendary Bay Area traffic, second worst in the nation. 5.7 million vehicles, So we talked about 7 million people, 5.7 million vehicles. Let's imagine some of them are very young and some of them are very old. That's a lot of cars, trucks, buses, trains. So they're responsible for 40% of our criteria pollutants, and those are the harmful pollutants that affect our health, and about 36% of our greenhouse gas inventory here in the Bay Area. So, like Randy had said, every agency or everybody who's going to come here this morning is going to have their own perspective on what sustainability means. For us at the Air District, when we talk about sustainable transportation, we talk about renewable and zero emissions fuels. And that's things that are not adding to our poor air quality and not adding to the greenhouse gas load. We also talk about zero emission vehicles and equipment, on-road and off-road equipment. And then, keying off what Randy said, but taking a different spin on it, we can't build our way to sustainable transportation. We're not building any more roads here in the Bay Area. So we need to maximize the use of the infrastructure that we have by utilizing technology and existing resources to get the most out of the infrastructure that we have. And finally, when we think sustainability, we're talking about either reduced vehicle miles traveled per capita in the area or replaced. And I'll explain what replaced means in my next couple of slides. So, relative to sustainable transportation strategies, when we think about zero emissions fuels, zero emissions vehicles, zero VMT or replaced VMT, these are the type of things we're talking about. Renewable fuels that don't add to the greenhouse gas loading or criteria pollutants loading in the area, such as renewable natural gas, biogas coming from digesters, electricity that's coming from a grid that's 33 and heading to 50% renewable energy, solar reformed hydrogen, shuttle buses that take folks out of their vehicles and maximize the use of the transportation assets that we have, ride sharing, bicycling, and the bicycling and the bicycle lanes, pedestrian improvements, that's the replacement of VMT. So that's what I meant by that. In terms of the maximizing of or leveraging of the transportation resources we have, we see that as the use of technology basically to make our transportation system more intelligent. Car sharing services, on-demand vehicles, automated vehicles, and then the use of things like bicycle sharing, which is essentially making bicycling come into the 21st century. So relative to all those transportation strategies, we at the Air District have been using our modest funding resources to put our money where our mouth is. We basically, over the last 10 years or so, have invested over $400 million in these sustainable transportation strategies. That means reducing emissions, putting money into alternative fuels, and I wanted to just give you a couple of highlights around some of the things that we've done this year. So this year we've put over $5 million into charging infrastructure for electric vehicles in this region. That's 1,000 level 2 chargers, 100 DC fast chargers, with 33% of the energy for those installations coming from solar. We've also been a successful contestant in some of the contests the state has had for cap and trade revenue. We've got $23 million coming for full battery electric and hybrid drayage trucks, which is very important to us because one of our main areas of concern in this region is the Port of Auckland. So we're deploying 43 battery electric vehicles in that area, and I'm happy to announce that in July, the Air District will be putting a further $12 million on the stump for folks in private and public industry for high mileage fleet and taxis. We're also going to be providing funding for zero emissions trucks and buses, and in each of these cases, keying off what I said earlier, the incentives go up for those who are using sustainable or renewable energy. We've also been working to do some planning, the planning that we need to implement some of these policies. And you can see here the plan that we prepared for this region in concert with our 109, well, it's actually 110 city and county governments, our partners at the university, targets the adoption of electric vehicles in the Bay Area to reduce greenhouse gases by about 15% per capita. Means that we need about 250,000 odd EVs here in the Bay Area on the light duty side in order to be able to achieve those goals. Relative to our targets, we're actually ahead of schedule, which is good news. This data comes from the state rebate program. You can see there that it states that there's roughly about 70,000 battery electric and plug-in electric hybrids on the roads here in the Bay Area. The blue dotted line below is our target to hit the 250,000 that I'd mentioned. And this information we think is off by about 15 to 20%. So we think the numbers of electric vehicles here in the Bay Area are closer to 100,000 currently on the roads. So one of the things I wanted to leave you with today is, the future is now when we talk about these sustainability technologies. I'm highlighting this one project because it really it marries all other things that we're talking about. This is a project that we just approved at our Air District. It gives $1 million for autonomous electric vehicles that provide last mile VMT reductions. All we need is to hook it up to solar, and I think I've covered every one of those points that we've discussed in the chart. But this is one of the innovative and I think new projects that we're going to see more and more of in the Bay Area. Things that maximize the resource that we have, things that utilize the new technologies. It uses intelligent autonomous drive. It's electric. It covers all the points that I believe we need for sustainability in transportation. I'm very excited for the discussion with you all this morning. I look forward to your questions, and I'm very happy to be able to provide that perspective on what we think sustainability in transportation means. Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. Next up, we've got Dr. Tim Lippman from UC Berkeley. I got it right.
You got it right this time. But no, I wasn't offended. I did do my graduate work at UC Davis, and they are both fabulous institutions. So I'm happy to represent both Berkeley and Davis anytime. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Lippman with UC Berkeley, and you'll hear some very similar things in my remarks to Damien's, actually. I guess we're kind of like-minded. And for me, the big thing with sustainable transportation these days, having done this for 20 or so years now, is that we're starting to think about sustainable transportation from more of a systems perspective. Previously, we tended to think about, well, what if we made a bunch of vehicles electric? What if we tried to use cellulosic biofuels in combustion engines? What if we tinkered with some transit improvements, put in a bus rapid transit system? But we weren't really thinking about integrated systems. And what's happening now at both Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, I think a lot of the universities, is that we're starting to think a much more complicated, kind of nuanced view of sustainable transportation, where we think about interrelated systems and how can we find leveraging and synergies between those in really very complicated ways, because the world is becoming very complicated very quickly. Things are changing very fast. So for me, that's really kind of the big thing. In the past, the thinking was very sort of siloed in certain areas. Now we're thinking about big systems, and the Department of Energy has a major push on this. The Department of Transportation has a major push on it. How many of you are aware that San Francisco is competing with 6 other cities for $40 million in funding from the Department of Transportation under the Smart Cities Challenge? You've heard about that. So
Very aware.
We'll have. Suzanne over there has been working tirelessly on it. UC Berkeley is heavily involved in the San Francisco effort, being led largely by my wife, actually, Susan Shaheen, who's co-director of TSRC, the center that I co-direct at Berkeley. And she's been up until 1 or 2 in the morning every night this week working on that proposal. And then my 4-year-old just this week decided that 6 a.m. is his new wake-up time, so you can kind of do the math on how much sleep we've been getting. But it's very exciting, and we're kind of running on adrenaline on it. Suzanne's been working really closely with Susan and Timothy Papandreou from SFMTA. And there was an article in the paper yesterday, the Chronicle, that says San Francisco makes pitch for the transit of the future. I'll just read a paragraph or two. Crowded along a long conference table, San Francisco officials outlined an ambitious plan that aims to eventually create the world's first shared, electric, connected, and autonomous transportation system in which people share autonomous electric cars and ride self-driving shuttles to transit, and in which businesses haul freight using automated vehicles. To develop such a system, the city would create a Smart City Institute and work with UC Berkeley and dozens of Bay Area companies that have promised, if San Francisco wins, to contribute $99 million in software, hardware, training, research, and testing, and deploying autonomous vehicles. So the cost match, and there's another $10 million, so this would be over a $150 million initiative. Now, cross your fingers, there are 6 other cities who are working very hard as well. And I think even if we're not successful, though, this competition has changed the way these cities are thinking about planning the future of their transportation systems. So even the cities that don't win are going to benefit, and I'm sure there'll be other ways that they can find funding to contribute to their efforts. So for me, there's really 3 kind of key streams that are running together now in sustainable transportation that I'll cover quickly, and I'll try to get us back on time here. Academic, the risk is we go on and on, right? But I'll control myself. So the 3 things really are electrification, and we talked about that. And I've been studying electric cars for more than 20 years. So what's going on with electrification is very exciting. These vehicles offer great environmental benefits, and they're also really fun to drive. And that's an important point because some people buy a green car, a lot of people will buy a better car. Electric vehicles are better cars. The other thing, which we heard from Damien, so I won't go into much detail, is connected and autonomous with connections to ride sharing. This is changing the world. And then the other thing is that I study a lot is transportation in the grid. How can electric vehicles and even hydrogen fuel cell systems be embedded in the electrical grids of the future, providing benefits to the grid, not just load and a demand on the grid, but actually helping the grid. And we're doing a lot of work with this, and I see a few colleagues in back who work on this as well. And so these things have key linkages also with advanced transit systems to get people out of single occupancy vehicles into lower emitting vehicles and lower emitting modes. So quickly with electrification, there are about 200,000 electric vehicles in California right now, which is about half the EVs in the country. And about 40% of those, I think, are in the Bay Area. Is that correct? So we're about 20% of the electric vehicles in the country here in the Bay Area. So if you see a lot of EVs around, that's why. And there's all these new models coming out right now. So I think we're going to see this proliferate. I was down at the ACT Expo conference in Long Beach a few weeks ago, and I got to see the Chevy Bolt with a B. And it's a 200-mile range electric car that, to me, seems to have a very solid feel, and that apparently will list for around $35,000 before incentives, if I got that right. So to me, that could be a real game changer, because now 200-mile range, our studies show that really is a big breakthrough for people. They suddenly don't have to think about charging every day. They could charge every few days, and they could comfortably get, say, from here to Sacramento and back, which is something I do, for example. The other big thing is the Tesla Gigafactory. How many of you have seen pictures of the Tesla Gigafactory when it's going to be completed? Okay, so many of you. So you see this huge building covered with solar panels, 10 million square feet of space. And by some measures, it would be the first or second largest building in the world when it's completed. And it will be producing about 2 billion battery cells per year when it's at full capacity. These are the small, what are called 18650 cells. I did the math, there'd be about 2 billion of those per year. That will exceed the current production of lithium-ion batteries in the world today when that factory is built. So we'll essentially double battery capacity. And that could greatly drive down battery costs. We've already seen lithium-ion battery costs at the vehicle pack level go from about $1,000 a kilowatt hour several years ago to a few $100s a kilowatt hour now. And with the Gigafactory, that could go even lower. And that, again, could be a big game changer. Also connected and autonomous, and Damien said a fair amount about this, so I won't say much, but there's various levels of autonomous from platooning, cars just following each other on the freeway, which is something UC Berkeley was working on 30 years ago, to full autonomous, cars driving on arterial streets by themselves. And then there's various stages in between. And I think it'll take a long time to get that full level of automation, but the sort of medium levels of automation are coming very quickly. And when my kids, 10 years from now, are getting their driver's license, I think the demands of the driver could be very different than they are now. And there's potential benefits to that in terms of safety, but I worry about the vehicle miles traveled impacts of autonomous vehicles. And there's some studies that show that autonomous could slightly reduce VMT, or greatly increase VMT with a huge amount of uncertainty. And that, I think, is something that we could direct with policy and how those vehicles are used. Do we allow zero occupancy vehicles? Is an important question. But what is clear is that big companies are spending billions of dollars on this, and it is coming pretty fast. So then finally on the vehicle grid integration, what's exciting about EVs for utilities is that they offer a very rare kind of flexible load. You're not going to be real happy if you're watching television and the utility decides to turn it off for 15 minutes, especially during a Warriors game. But if you have your EV plugged in and you have all night to charge it, if they interrupt it for 15 minutes, you probably aren't even going to notice. And that's something that utilities could value a lot. And there's a pilot project with BMW called iCharge Forward that PG&E is doing, where drivers are actually being paid to allow the utility to interrupt their charge and getting value from that. That can further reduce the cost of electric vehicle ownership. So that's very exciting. And what's also exciting about that is that electric vehicles in that way can help us to accommodate larger amounts of renewable energy on the grid. We're trying to move towards 50% renewables, but that means sun that's during the day, wind that's blowing at night. Again, this flexible load can help to accommodate more renewables. That makes the grid cleaner, makes the vehicles cleaner. It's kind of a virtuous cycle there. So I'm very excited about that prospect. So I think to keep us on time, I'll wrap it up there. To me, the big thing in sustainable transportation is this new systems thinking. We're thinking about integrated systems, electric combined with autonomous, combined with behavioral changes, combined with the greening of the grid. Let's keep it going. And I look forward to a great couple days. We'll have a fuel cell car out on display, and I look forward to questions and also to talking more with you guys over the next few days. Thank you very much.
Remember, the standard gratuity is 15% for table service. Hint, hint. Thank you, Tim. Coming up next, we've got John Cato with the Energy Commission.
So with 10 minutes, I'll really cut to the chase and really get to the highlights and some of the very important information nuggets I want to present to you guys today. I just want to start off with a quick story. Aaron from East Bay kind of caught me off guard yesterday with hey, so what are you going to say at the panel? And so at that time, I was kind of still developing my monologue and what I was thinking. And she hit me right off the top was the answer to the question of what do I think of the most important thing to take away from sustainability, transportation. And the first thing that came to my mind was you, because everything that we do is by choice. It's about you as the consumer that drives the behavior and the acceptance of what we provide to you as the technology options of the future. So first I thought it was you, because that is the important, because you are the driver of where we need to go. And then I thought about, so what is sustainability? And to me, I usually think of sustainability with the three simple E's: environment, economy, equity. And so, well, you know what? As an individual, it's difficult to accomplish those things. So it really is coming down to the important thing about sustainable transportation, it's partnerships. I myself, in my program that I'll describe quickly after this, my monologue, is not enough to provide us with a sustainable transportation system. And what Dr. Provided with the new cutting edge technologies and what I've seen, and Damien's partnerships, and then Brent, a new partnership, and then seeing John Michelin too. You know, you think about, it's about a collaborative effort. It's about partnerships. It's about understanding community needs. And so sustainable transportation in of itself is important, but it has to be incorporated with sustainable communities. And then part of that is sustainable communities, sustainable transportation, then you have a sustainable California. And that provides an example for a sustainable nation. And so when thinking along those contexts, the framework for what we're applying today still relies on you as an individual to help us shape the direction where we're going, but it also relies on a partnership. So kind of a dual answer to not a single most, but it is a combination of you and a partnership. So I kind of want to frame that from the beginning. And so how the Energy Commission comes into play as a partner is we have a program called the Alternative Renewable Fuel and Vehicle Technology Program. And it's a $100 million program that we get every year, and we invest in various sectors for California. We invest in the hydrogen sector for the upbringing of hydrogen stations throughout California. We have a goal of 100 stations, and then the idea behind that is to transform people's thought on the way we drive, the way we refuel, and just kind of think and prime California for the next generation of thought and technology. And we also have, in my section also, another area that we fund is electric vehicle infrastructure technology support. and where we help and partner, and soon we'll strengthen our partnership with DME and Air Districts and Brent and DGS, is trying to ensure that there is an infrastructure out there that supports the consumer acceptance of buying and using full electric vehicles. So the governor has a mandate of 1.5 million vehicles by 2025 for California. That is his goal. He also has a goal that he's providing an executive order of 1 million vehicle support for infrastructure by 2020. So we have goals in place. However, we have those lofty goals, but the important part is we need dialogue, feedback from a community level to see where to deploy them most effectively. And that helps shape and develop a more successful program. So again, it goes back to you as the consumer, you as the community, provide a valuable input to where we place and strategically deploy and meet California's goals. Another part of my operation that we also invest in is biofuels, in-state biofuels production. Part of the governor's directive and direction is 50% reduction in petroleum dependency. And so with that target, the governor has given us a charge to create the alternative fuel, biofuels, renewable natural gas, renewable diesel, renewable biodiesel, renewable hydrogen. And so part of that is providing the next alternative fuel source within California to lessen dependency on foreign oil and the fluctuations of outside influences, and really make a sustainable California. Not only simply in the environment, economy, with jobs, but also equity, so that everyone has an equal opportunity to benefit from all of these accomplishments. And so that is the challenge that we have, is we have these goals, but the challenging part is we need that community feedback to make sure that there is equity, there's economy, where there are jobs, because one of the things we want to avoid is, as we introduce the new technologies, we don't want to displace jobs, because there is a technology growth that needs to develop, and that's the other part of my program, is workforce development. And so part of the charge is, as we do strategic investments for new technologies, priming California for the next leap in technology and a sustainable transportation and a sustainable communities, we also want to be aware that there's a workforce component that needs to be addressed, so no one gets left behind, and truly the equity component of sustainability is maintained. So environment, economy, equity. And so that's kind of the summation of where my programs kind of invest in, and then really capitalizing on the key message of partnerships, because again, it was refreshing that as I became deputy director that I am able to engage more in the partnership aspect, and that is the key for success for all of us into making California not only a stronger California, but a sustainable California and a strong role model for the nation. And so that is what the message I leave with you today.
At this time, I'd like to open up the floor for questions. We got a few minutes to go here. In the back, Suzanne?
I'm curious if anyone can speak to efforts about trucks, light-duty trucks, what we can do about the lack of low-emission light-duty trucks in fleets.
I think we're a fleet operator as well, same as everybody else, right? The Air District operates about 120 vehicles. 81% of that fleet operates on alternative fuel, natural gas, plug-in electric vehicles, hydrogen. We're moving to roughly, by the end of the year, we'll be at around 95%. And that 5% that we cannot get at are those light-duty trucks. We, like the Department of State Services, have tried pretty much everybody. We've tried all of the major manufacturers, and what we see is there are a lot of hybrid kits out there. There are folks who produce one-off, but for bigger fleets, folks want that reliability. So there are two things that could help. I think upping of the national CAFE standards for those vehicles would help. We desperately need that help here in California because we need to reduce nitrogen oxide emissions from those vehicles, and we in the state of California are imploring the feds to make that change. I think with that change, you would see the vehicle manufacturers get serious and bring those vehicles to market.
And I want to add also that when you put things in context for light-duty trucks, if you want to, I guess, put that in the scheme of if it's a freight delivery mechanism versus a passenger kind of, your typical truck you take to high school or something. On a freight basis, the governor has, and I'm part of this too, our agency, ARB, CEC, and GoBiz, and Caltrans have come out with the Sustainable Freight Action Plan, which addresses freight and goods movement through the ports, including Port of Oakland, and looking to provide a guidance documents on how to better benefit and provide a sustainability theme for all those activities of moving goods. And the light duty vehicle, the light duty truck aspect, if you want to look at the class, we'll say class 3, 4, 5, 6, which we would consider last mile delivery. And that's an important component of making a sustainable system. And so we're looking at alternatives because not every last mile delivery system fits every port in every city. So for example, the Bay Area, because of its demographics and high density population, a trucking solution may not be the best option. Perhaps it might be maybe a bicycle hybrid electric last mile delivery for packages for LA or Fresno through the port of Stockton, or Sacramento maybe, a zero emission hybrid type light duty truck kind of solution. So, but the technologies are still in flux and still progressing. There's a lot of demonstration projects that show very good promise, but there is a overarching driver to ensure that the aspects and the delivery methods for a sustainable freight solution that is sustainable is being developed. So just be aware. And then also, if you have a chance to read this, it is open for public comment, so please provide comments, especially from a community aspect. I know we have OEMs and actual big industry folks commenting to make sure that it fits their needs, but also, again, because of the equity issue, we want to ensure that the communities that are impacted and are involved also have a chance to have their opinions and their suggestions incorporated for the record. So please, if you have a chance, this is available now, so take a look at it and provide comments. Thank you.
And I think the light duty truck might be a bit of a holy grail at this point for municipalities, so I feel your pain, but just so everybody knows, there are some options when you talk about the cargo vans, which could be a possible solution. And we do have a demo vehicle from Zenith, battery electric vans, which Alameda County's already been running for a year or two. So I think the market is moving in that direction, but just not fast enough to catch up with us in California. Because doggone it, not only are we going to win an NBA championship, but we're clearly leading the league when it comes to clean air vehicles. I had to plug the Warriors, right? Okay, additional questions? Philip?
Yeah, for DGS, you had mentioned that you did some training with your staff when you rolled out EVs into your motor pool. Can you speak to that a little bit, like how you developed that, and what are some of the specific barriers or problems that your staff were having in that sort of commercial application?
Yeah, no real barriers or problems for staff, and I won't tell you it was anything extraordinarily robust, but one of the things that staff did was we basically connected them with the dealerships and local representatives that established the contract for those electric vehicles, and so they got training from there. And the other cool thing that staff did is they actually developed a brochure. Particularly when we first did this, the vehicles that we had in there was a Ford Focus electric, some Chevrolet Volts, and a Nissan Leaf. So they actually developed a brochure that managers and staff worked together to develop a brochure that they actually use as a handout for the actual employees, because you step into a Nissan Leaf and each one of these vehicles are different, and so it was so training in terms of understanding, making sure our staff, the dispatch, was trained exactly on what the range of these vehicles were, how they needed to be educating the employees, and then having some literature to give to the employees so that they had a better understanding of the vehicle they were operating. And they do walk-arounds before they even put the employees in the vehicle as well, and teach them about the technology.
I do want to add, though, because I did check out an electric vehicle from DGS's garage, and the training is incredibly important because, one, it educated me and my staff, because not all of us have a chance to ride one. And so the fact that they're educated and they can provide a better customer experience and outreach and education on the fly and makes it very simple and less intimidating, I think that creates a good model for providing acceptance and education and outreach. So I want to give you kudos for that. Good.
Additional questions? Usually it only gets quiet like this just before lunch. Well, we do have another panel coming up at 10:30. So before we break for that, to summarize what I heard here, some of the essential ingredients, so to speak, the most important things, plan and vision, and of course some accompanying legislation or policy Technology systems, infrastructure, this is the way of the future. Partnerships, funding and other incentives. And I think another key component is this is a constantly evolving effort, so it's going to be an ongoing process. I'm not sure, Brent, you make a really good point about announcing progress. It's great to announce that you've achieved success, but it's going to be very difficult to put a push pin on the chart and say, okay, great, we're done. Now what? Because I think technology will evolve, expectations will evolve. You mentioned the renewable fuels. All these things are going to play an important role in the future. But my parting comment, since there is time, is going to drill a little deeper on what John said about you and the importance of you. You, the individual here in this room, you representing your organization that runs clean air vehicles, you are making a difference. It may not feel like it. Some of us have 53,000 vehicles and running thousands of alternative fuel vehicles, but I guarantee you Brent wants to do better. You're out in the room, maybe you only have a couple of hybrids, maybe you only have a couple of plug-in vehicles, and you think that's not enough. Well, let me tell you, that is enough, because you as an individual or an organization might not think you're achieving great things, but we as a group collectively, we are getting there. And believe me, the nation is looking at what's going on in California. So I commend you for being here. Thank you for your participation, and please head on back here at 10:30 for the follow-on panel.